And it's also important to understand that even today in the medical profession, they describe muscles in the body that restrict the flow of something. They call them, after this statue, they call them sphincter muscles. The pupil of your eye is a sphincter muscle. When you walk from a darkened room outside into the light, your sphincter muscle or your pupil contracts to limit the amount of light coming into your eye. You all right now are sitting on a sphincter muscle, an anus. And if you can think about it from another context, what the Europeans have successfully done is taken a symbol that represents the Son of God and have reduced it to an asshole. We're talking about serious business. We're talking about understanding the need to begin to reevaluate everything that impacts upon our lives. Everything that impacts upon our lives. Next slide, please. Now, I spoke earlier about Heru. This is his daddy, Asar. Asar, the first individual in the recorded history of humanity, the first crucified Savior, the first resurrected Savior. The story of Asar and his wife, Aset, and their son, Heru, is the first story of a trinity. See, because after Asar was murdered, his spirit came back and impregnated his wife, Aset, who was a virgin. And then 9 months later, she gives birth to their son, Heru, who was born coincidentally on December the 25th, the same date as his daddy. This is a story that was written by African people over 4,000 years before the story of Jesus the Christ. Those of you who travel to can see these scenes painted on the temple of Luxor. You can see scenes carved on the Philae temple. You can read the writings. You can see it for yourself. Next slide. That's Asar. This is his wife, Aset, and their son, nursing their son, Heru. We know them all now by their Greek names, Osiris, Isis, and Horus. But it's important to realize that this statue here is the prototype for the Madonna and Child. The prototype. There were thousands of these images which were carved in the Nile Valley. They were later taken throughout the world. It's also important for us to understand that after Kemet was conquered by the foreigners, during their initial stay in Kemet, they worshiped these African gods. It was only later when they began to return home, they realized that they couldn't take African gods back to their European brothers and mothers and fathers, so they Europeanized these African gods. In the next slide, we see the Greek interpretation of this couple. The next slide, please, brother. We see the Greek interpretation of Aset and Heru now as Isis and Horus. After the Romans ran the Greeks out of Egypt, the Romans also worshiped the African gods, and just as their Greek predecessors could not take African gods back home with them, so they Latinized Isis and Horus. In the next slide, we see them portrayed as the Madonna and Child. Next slide, please. So this is the image that we mistakenly accept as the real story of the Madonna and Child, when it is in fact nothing but a pale imitation, literally, nothing but a pale imitation of an African original. Next slide. Now, in terms of understanding the depth of the knowledge which came out of ancient Kemet, we've got to begin to realize that one of the reasons used to justify our enslavement was the fact that we were heathens and had no concept of God. It was the Portuguese who first sanctioned our enslavement. It was the Pope who deemed us as soulless individuals, who stated that It is through our enslavement that we would have an opportunity to know God, and if we are good slaves, maybe we will go to heaven. Well, I want to share with you an image, a scene, that can be found in numerous temples and papyri in Kemet. A scene that is referred to as the weighing of the soul. It is one of the first images of the resurrected Savior, Asar, seated on the throne of judgment, making a determination whether or not the soul that comes before him will go to heaven or to hell. All of these steps are carefully identified, and let me walk you through them. Here we see the image of the soul that comes before Asar. We see that this image is dressed in white because for thousands of years before the world was turned upside down, white was the color associated with death. White represented the absence of the life principle. And you all know this. I mean, subconsciously, you all, I'm not telling you all anything new. Think about this next month, on Mother's Day, when you go to church. If your mother is alive, you will wear a red carnation. If she is deceased, you will wear a white carnation. Because we know, we still know, that white is the color associated with death. Nothing racist about it, it just represents the absence of life. Black is the color associated with life. Life comes from blackness. So here we see the soul of this man, dressed in white, standing before two dual images of Ma'at. Ma'at is the counterpart, the wife of Jehudi. Ma'at represents the principles of truth, justice, righteousness, balance, harmony, and reciprocity. We see the symbol associated with Ma'at, the ostrich feather here in her hair. We also see the brother clutching the ostrich feather to his chest. In the next part of the scene, we see Impu and Heru standing before the scale of Ma'at. It is at the scale of Ma'at where on one side of the balance we see the feather. On the other side of the balance we see a symbol which represents the heart of the deceased. Why the heart? Because in the African tradition it was believed that the heart was the seat of the soul. Hence the title of this scene, The Weighing of the Soul of the Deceased. So as the soul of this man is weighed opposite the feather of Ma'at, he recites the 42 admonitions of Ma'at. He declares his innocence to God. He says, I have not stolen. I have not robbed. I have not committed adultery. I have not spoken ill of God. 42 admonitions of Ma'at. And if he is telling the truth, then his heart will be as light as a feather. That's where the concept comes from, meaning that he has lived a righteous life in accordance to the principles of Ma'at. And this event, the weighing of the soul, is recorded in the book of judgment by Jehudi, the husband of Ma'at. And then Asar, seated on his throne, makes the final judgment as to whether or not the soul of this man goes to heaven or hell. Powerful concepts, sisters and brothers, that were developed by African people thousands of years before they resurfaced in the Christian world. Next slide. Again, can we have some fine focus on that slide, please? Here's another image of Ma'at. Now, I want to play the role of a psychiatrist for a second. You know how when you're in therapy, trying to put the pieces of your life together, psychiatrists will sometimes show you images and will ask you what memories those images jar. So I want you to look at this image of Ma'at. See the ostrich feather in the hair, you see the ostrich hands and the wings. Look at that image. What memories does it bring to your mind? What thoughts does it trigger? The ego, Native American. Brother on the back hit on it. Next slide. The concept of the angel came from the image of Ma'at. Here is a 15th century painting of the archangel Michael. Here you see a human figure. Can we fine focus that, brother? Human figure with wings, holding in his hand the scale of Ma'at, the balance of truth and justice and righteousness. On one side of the balance, you see the soul that is to be weighed. On the other side of the balance, you see the forces of